One day they made this hologram in the room of a square and a circle that looked like that. It was the first time that I have any conscious recollection of being able to, I've ever seen that, or that square and the circle before in that particular relationship. And so they had me look at it, and I looked at it, and then they said, do you see it? And I said, yes. And they said, okay, your job now is to find that relationship in Metatron's cube. And then they left. And I actually thought at the moment when they left, because they always give me those little things, and usually I figure them out pretty quick and then go on to the next one. And when they gave me that, I figured, well, okay, I'll do it in a few hours here, or maybe I'll get it by tomorrow. And I started working on it, and I couldn't find it, and I just kept going. Days went by, and weeks went by, and months started going by, and I was sitting there and I was getting really frustrated. I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out where that relationship was inside of those circles. I tried every conceivable thing that I could think of. Of course, I didn't have 12 lines in there, which might have made a difference, but it still didn't. It wasn't where it was at anyway, so it wouldn't have made any difference even if I did have the proper Metatron's cube. And one day, the angels interceded directly, which they don't usually do in my life, but they have a few times. And this was one of them. I was sitting with this stuff late at night with patterns all over the floor, and nobody knew what I was doing, by the way. This was very secret in my life. I didn't discuss this with anyone, maybe once in a while, but it was really rare. No one really knew. This is sort of a thing that I was doing, and it just was, I was driven to do it. Nobody even cared anyway, so it didn't really make any difference. In those times, nobody cared about this stuff. And so one day, I've got it all over the floor, and I'm trying to find the circle and the square in this thing, and I get a knock on the door. So I open the door up, and here's somebody standing there I've never seen before in my whole life, this tall, kind of this guy. And he says, sorry, he said he was sorry to bother me and everything else like that, but that he had been sent there from his group to talk to me and to tell me about the circle and the square. And I just kind of looked at him, and he told me, I don't think he even told me his name. I just sort of grabbed him and pulled him in the room. Sit down. If you know anything about a circle and a square, I don't want to listen about this stuff. And he said he was sent there right from the Masons, that they had told him that he had to come to, they had given him my address and everything, and told him to come to me. And so this drawing here was his. I didn't draw this. The very first thing he did is he made a square on the page. And the second thing he did is he made the circle. Before he ever even started, and I went, oh, there it is. That's it. That's the one. And then he started making all these fancy lines all over the place. He divided it into like this, and then he drew a diamond around here, like that. And then he drew from that point up to the circle and back, and down to the circle and back, like that. And then he did something that I didn't quite understand at the time. He drew this line that was here, he drew a parallel line up to there. And this line here, he drew a parallel line down, and he reflected this to this one in the same way, forming this pattern like that. By the rules that I had understood, that's cheating. That doesn't, you can't play that game because these points don't go anywhere. Everything has to go to defined places that you can geometrically mark, and you don't have to measure or anything else like that. And these don't go anywhere, you know. So anyway, that was I had a real problem with that when he started talking about it. And so he said the secret to this whole thing is that the perimeter of the square has to equal the circumference of the circle. For those of you who have read Taoism and a lot of the Lao Tzu and stuff, the whole thing about circling the square and squaring the circle, you probably heard this before in poems and everything else. it's all trying to get the geometry so that the two equal each other. And life is constantly trying to deal with this relationship in so many ways, on biological levels and everything else. At least in retrospect, I know that. I didn't know that then. And then he began to tell me that this created something called the phi ratio, which I wrote up in here before, of this ratio of phi, which equals phi, and this ratio is 1.618, is what it's usually approximated at, because what comes after that is 0.339, but this amount here, since this is 0 plus a tiny bit, is so small that they just eliminate that. And they approximate it at 1.618. I didn't know what this meant. I didn't have any idea what that was at that time. But he talked about it and how that it was a proportion in life and how important it was. He spent about 2 hours telling me how important it was. And he said that all the lines in here were all broken up into the phi ratio. Now what the phi ratio is if you were to take this little rod that I have in my hand here, there's an infinite number of places you could cut it in, but there's only two that you could cut it or bend it in. That would be the phi ratio, and one would be here, and one would be approximately here. Those would be the two places, real close. The human can zero right into that. Humans can, for example, pick the center of a circle better than most mechanical things can, just by going like that. Because we can intuit it. If this was the rod, again, we can either pick here or there, approximately where the phi ratio is. Now, depending on which direction you're coming from. Now, this is what I mean by that. If you're coming from, say, this direction, and this is the phi ratio here, this will create a mathematical proportion such that if this segment is A, and this segment is B, and the whole thing is C, then it's a ratio such that A divided by B is proportionate to B divided by C. It's just a simple relationship. And it creates this mathematical formula. No matter how big or long, you can get something 12 miles long, you're going to cut it at a certain place, and the miles and everything will divide. It doesn't matter if it's inches or centimeters or whatever it is. It doesn't make any difference what your yardstick is. It's always going to be the same. Okay. Well, if you had never heard about the phi ratio, you would not have any idea how much you are immersed in the phi ratio. There's so many places that it would not be possible. This is literally true. There's so many places in the body that it would not be possible for someone to count them all in their lifetime. If they were counting every single day of their lives for the rest of their lives. You couldn't do it. Wouldn't be possible because there's at least 100 trillion cells and it's all through those. So not counting all the places throughout the rest of the body and everything else, it's just phenomenal where God has used this same particular ratio. He then brought in Leonardo's drawing with a square in the circle around it, which I had not really thought much about before. And he talked about that somewhat. And then he drew this compass and this square and this eye of somebody. It doesn't look like the right eye of horse. The right eye of horse has these three lines that go. It's Egyptian. It's very different. That looks like a real person's eye kind of there. And then he left. I never saw him ever since the rest of my life. But my life's not over with, so who knows? He may show up. After he left, he didn't tell me the answer, but after he left, I got it. Somewhere along the line, I got it. And I realized that Metatron's cube is really a three-dimensional object. Being three-dimensional, you could rotate it and look at Metatron's cube from a different view. And so when you do that, if you rotate Metatron's cube to this view, it becomes square rather than hexagonal. Once it's in there like that, just taking the center part of Metatron's cube out, which is really the egg of life, just this 4 little cells up like that. Well, first of all, it's in a cube, so you could put a perfect cube that would fit around here. And it has the zona pellucida around it, which is a sphere. And so the very nature of this 8-cell division is that there is a sphere around it and a cube around it. And the cube is such that it points precisely to where the 16-cell division goes. And that looked like what they were showing me. But according to this guy from Mason's, the key is that the perimeter had to equal the circumference. And so I spent several more years trying to calculate and finally came up with, son of a gun, it doesn't. It doesn't work. But then I remembered that that's the inner surface of the zona pellucida. There's 2 circles that go around the flower of life. And if you go to the outer surface of the zona pellucida, bingo, it's a near perfect phi ratio, right on. It's contained, this relationship of the square, circling a square and squaring a circle is contained in the original 8 cells of life. And from there, many, many, many things began to unfold very rapidly for me from there. From now on, whenever you see a square with 4 circles in it like that, we are always talking about the egg of life, okay? Cell division. So here's these 4 circles. I then tried to draw in these other patterns just to see kind of what it would look like over that, superimpose it to see if I can find a thing. And again, this doesn't seem to appear to go difference. And that's a very, very small amount between the arm length and the height. And that 1/10,000th of an inch is not a mistake. It is part of the Fibonacci sequence, which you'll see later. It's built in. It's part of it. And so we have this squareness or cubeness around us. And look where the center of that square field is. Exactly here at the base of the spine, which happens to be where this other little square sits, of these 8 cells. Centered in the center of this cube is a tiny cube with this big cube out around the outside of us. This is what I mean by we grow radially out from those original 8 cells. The lines from the original 8 cells, from my way of seeing, 55 feet right from the moment of conception, right moment that it gets to this level here, you've got a field, even on a baby, that's going to be 27.5 feet out there approximately all the way around it. The lines and everything are extended out there. The whole thing's there. And then we start growing just like a crystal along the lines. If you put your legs out like this and your arms out like that, there will be a perfect sphere that will fit around the body, or a circle, either one. But its center will be at the navel, not at the base of the spine. The center of this one is right here. You can see if you look at the circle how I'm aiming into the center of that circle. Though the science behind navels is pretty interesting. I'll leave that for just a little bit more to discuss that, but it's not as straightforward as it looks. So, and when that happens, the square and the circle, hit exactly on the floor. If you were to take the circle, center of the circle, and move it down to the center of the square, this would move exactly halfway, and the whole thing would have that image that you saw in the first place. The square, the perimeter of the square that fits around the human body, and the circumference of the circle that fits around the human body, of this particular body, is almost identical. And I can prove that mathematically in a little bit. It's almost exactly the same. Almost is part of the game here. We got to wait a little bit. You'll see what this almost is all about. There's no mistakes in the geometry of life at all. None there. Everything is flawless. It's all runs right down there. And soon we're going to see that all these lines that Leonardo drew on the body, you see the line at the wrists and here and across the neck and here and across the knees and everything. And the face is broken up in all these lines. These all have deep meaning. And this man obviously knew about what I'm about to discuss. And I'll be able to pretty clearly show to you that that's true. And only we're just beginning to get into what this is all about. But Leonardo was right on top of all of this a long time ago. This thing about phi ratio again, which we still don't really know what it's all about yet. According to Thoth, as above, so below. He was the one that said that, by the way. And the human body is the measuring stick of the universe and the fields of the body. It measures the macrocosm as well as the microcosm. Anything that you need to know on any level of existence whatsoever is contained in the human field. It's the open book of all that is. And so anything you want to know should be there, and one of the main things is this phi ratio thing should be in the very proportions of the human body. And where that is located in is if you've got a square around here with a line down the middle, right? And if you drew the line that divided the body in half down the middle, and then you drew a diagonal from there to there, that line that comes down as a diagonal and then goes over there, the bend in it is mathematically exactly the phi ratio. It could not be any more perfect. It's not even possible. Here is the square around the body and the line down the middle, and this is that diagonal that would go up to this imaginary corner up there. If you just use one edge as 1, that's your measuring stick, then this divides this into 1/2 and 1/2. So you got that right away. And what you're looking for is C. And this will be B, and this one over here will be A. And since, remember that ratio that I showed over there, A divided by B is going to be equal to B divided by A plus B, or B divided by C. Now C is simply, what I've done here is I've taken a line like that, a compass, and ruled this out like that. So this B is the same as this B, and so you've got a line of A and B, and the whole line is C. And so you've got A divided by B is proportionate to B divided by A plus B, or proportionate to B plus divided by C. We also know, because Pythagoras lived, he said that B squared equals this side squared plus this side squared, and this side is A, so you have B squared equals A squared plus 1 squared. A squared we know is 1/2, and 1 squared is 1, and 1/2 squared is 1/4, so B squared equals 5/4, or B equals the square root of 5 divided by 2. So this equals the square root of 5 divided by 2. And we know another simple equation is that C equals A plus B. And C is what we're looking for here. And if you take A, which is 1/2, and B, which is the square root of 5 divided by 2, so C equals 1/2 plus the square root of 5 divided by 2. Just try it. Take that formula. Take that formula and put it into your computer. Just take 0.5 plus square root of 5 divided by 2. It's a simple equation. Put it into any little computer and watch what happens. It'll go 1.618 and it'll go until it runs out of computer chips. It will never go to, if you got a lot of computer chips in there, you better wait a while, because that thing's going to really be going like this, trying to find an end. It won't ever find an end. It hit it right on the nail. Exactly. Right on the nail. That is how you get to that, and it's in the human proportions. So here's the human body with this line down the middle and this diagonal coming up here. Well, if you were to draw a line from the navel straight across here over to this point, parallel again, from here to here, another one of those no-nos. This is not my drawing originally. This is someone else's. The first thing is that these two lines cross exactly at the phi ratio. This line is broken into the phi ratio. This line is broken into the phi ratio, creating we haven't talked about it yet, but this is a golden triangle, and this is a golden triangle, and this big one is a golden triangle, creating this same pattern. And this line from the top of the head to the navel, from the navel to the bottom of the feet, is also broken in the phi ratio, which means the top of the body relative to the bottom of the body from the navel is in the phi ratio. Though it's a little more complex than that, and people have studied this in great detail, when a baby is born, the navel is in the dead center, shouldn't use that word, is in the precise center of the baby. So it's right in the center of the baby. But as the baby starts growing, if it's it starts heading toward phi ratio, and it goes above it, and then below it, and above it, and below it, and above it, and below it, and starts zeroing in, getting closer and closer and closer and closer and closer to phi ratio as the child gets older and older and older and approaches adult. And a female, I believe, ends up with the navel is above the phi ratio, and the male ends up with it slightly below. You got to average the two, and you get the phi ratio. This is what the computers have found. So it's even more amazing than just saying it's the phi ratio. And but it's not just the top half of the body and the phi ratio, the bottom half of the body, as you're about to see. It's really a much more complex situation. Taking the finger, for example, every bend in your body is in the phi ratio. If you take this bone compared to this bone, that's in the phi ratio. This bone is in the phi ratio to this one, and this one's in the phi ratio to this one. And all the bones running through your hands and your feet are all bent exactly at the phi ratio. The length of your hand compared to this bone, that bends at the phi ratio. And this bone, relative to this bone, bends at the phi ratio. The length of your foot to this one, and the length of this bone to this one, etc., all the way up through. In fact, it's all your bones are all in the phi ratio, running through your whole body. And even things that you wouldn't normally think about. You probably never saw this before, though you may have wondered about it. And we haven't talked about the golden mean spiral, though we will in a minute. I always forget to use this one. You take your hand like this, and you go like this, and watch. Can you see that ratio? They move in the golden mean spiral as they move. It's actually a Fibonacci spiral. You can see the spiraling like in a nautilus shell that happens in there. If you even do things like do something real unusual like this, where you connect the centers of each one of your fingertips in this zigzag pattern, each one of these bends are in the phi ratio as they go down there like that. So it's emerged throughout your whole body, but in all kinds of ways. The sizes of organs relative to the size of other organs, and the sizes in the cells, the sizes of nuclei to other things. It just goes on and on and on and on and on. It's somewhat redundant. Now, the ancients were well aware of this. The Greeks, Egyptians, Chinese, all of them from a long time ago, they understood this relationship in life. And so this, by the way, is another way to show a phi ratio. In other words, instead of showing a straight line with a dot on it, if you were going to show a bunch of phi ratios, all you'd have is a bunch of dots on a line. So another way to do it is have a curve like this, showing where it crosses at the phi ratio. And this way you can see all the curves at one time and see where one came from to the next one. This came out of The Power of Limits by, I can't pronounce his name, I'm sorry, Dorksey. Does anybody know how to pronounce his name? It's a book called The Power of Limits, and it's a very, very, very good book on sacred geometry. And here you can see how they have the navel here, and they even showed it slightly above, which is accurate on this. And exactly where the nipples are forms another phi ratio in here. It forms a phi ratio with the knees. all your various points in your body. And this is just a few. You can just keep going on and on and on and on and on. And but the point I want to make here is the Greeks, when they understood this, they created architecture and all of their arts using both sides of their brain simultaneously. They used the left side, their logical male side, that when they were making this sculpture, they carefully measured all the lengths of everything. There was no intuitiveness, none, absolutely zero. Everything was used carefully measured. But at the same time, they used their creative side, their feminine creative side, to decide exactly how he's going to be standing and where he's looking and what he's going to feel like and what kind of smile he's got and all these other kinds of things on his face. Which created, and the unity between the left and the right side of the brains in this kind of way, created an art form that is stupendous. The Greek sculpture is incredible. And yet the Romans that came in directly behind them did not know anything for many years later until the Italian Renaissance, did not know about this mathematics that was behind the sculpture and their buildings and everything else that they had, like the Greek Parthenon. They didn't know about that. And all they saw was these amazing statues and amazing artwork. Even the bowls, where the bowls come in and where the art's laid out on it and the sizes of them and everything was all in sacred geometry. And so when the Romans tried to do this, they just tried to copy it. They tried to intuit the feelings of this stuff. And some of them got very good, like Michelangelo, but at that point, I actually think, by that time he already knew. He knew about sacred geometry. But in the beginnings, when they first took over, they didn't. And you look at the initial stages of Roman art relative to Greek art, and forget it. They're not even close, man. It doesn't have anything even close to the type of feel that was in the Greek art. But this proportions of life, called the phi ratio, is not just in the human structure. It's in all life. Everything, bugs and plants and trees and the relationship of planets and orbits and everything else. It's in all of it. It ties down into electrons and everything else. But even in here, you can see the relationships. This is not a real good one, but the length of the body compared to the size of the wings and everything else. And if you were really going to get into it, where the dots are located and everything else, is all phi ratio stuff. This one is a dragonfly, and the length of each tail segment coming in here is all in these cascading phi ratios over here. And then they didn't get into it, but the bend in every one of the legs and arms, and the size of the head this way relative to it this way. Even the overall structure, like we have a square that fits around us, and this is a rectangle that fits around that. All of your external fields that fit around all of the geometrical forms are all going to be functions of this. Now ours is directly, it's a square, but there's the square, there's the diamond field this way, which is a rectangle, the diamond field this way, which is a rectangle, there's a hexagonal field that goes this way, and there's another one that fits up over this way. And the outer fields are all going to be directly associated with those or functions of them, meaning additions, multiplications, divisions of those shapes. And this is a frog skeleton, and you can see here where they've shown that all the divisions inside the frog bone are all broken down into these very strict mathematics. It's not just at random. There's no randomness. And this one is fish, which I chose this one because there's so many different kinds of fish that it's hard to imagine that they can all be purely mathematical. They really do seem to be non-mathematical, but they're really not. The location of where, once a shape takes place, then that once an outer body shape takes place, it very rapidly determines everything else. Where the fin is going to be located and how high and long and all these kind of things will be determined. There's only certain shapes that can be. Once you make one line, then you have predetermined a lot of other lines. In fact, they're all forms are probably holographic. I say that because of some of the work of Lucy Lubitz later on, which I'll show you what some of the things she did. She took I'll actually show you the photograph of this. She was at the Karnak Temple in Egypt, and there was this big pile of rocks that they had gathered up from that had been thrown all over the place when this place was destroyed. It was a temple. The Romans came in and really wrecked things up. And all these rocks were just all broken up in pieces. They knew they were from the same temple because they were an unusual kind of rock. They were different than anything else there. But it's just a big pile of rocks, so they just piled them up in this big pile. And Lucy came up and just picked up one of these rocks. It was in good shape, and measured it, went back and made a drawing of what the temple was going to look like, the whole thing. And they took the drawing and put it together. And when you see it a little later, you won't believe that that would have been possible. But it did, and she did it on another temple too. That's when I really began interested in her work. She was an amazing person, but we'll have to wait till a little later to see that. I shouldn't have told you that.